Rosaline Mason screamed the sound that made grown men turn their horses around. It wasn't fear. It was something older than that. Something that clawed its way up from the earth itself. Late September, 1878. Somewhere between civilization and the edge of the American frontier. Her cabin sat alone on a ridge overlooking the plains, weathered gray wood barely holding against the wind. Inside, an oil lamp flickered. Outside, the grass bent low like it was trying to hide. Rosaline had been screaming at night for 5 years. The townsfolk down in Redemption Flats called her mad. Some called her cursed. Most just called her dangerous and stayed away. But tonight was different. Tonight, a man collapsed at her fence line. Wyatt Jeff hit the ground hard, face first in the dirt, his shirt soaked black with blood. He'd been riding for 2 days straight, running from men who didn't forgive, didn't forget, and didn't stop. His leg was torn open from a bullet that grazed too deep, his vision blurred. His breath came in short, desperate gasps. Then he heard it. The scream. It tore through the night air, raw and piercing, and Wyatt's first thought was that he'd ridden straight into hell itself. The cabin door flew open. Lamplight spilled across the porch. And there she stood, Rosaline Mason, white hair wild around her face, eyes sharp as broken glass. She looked at Wyatt, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then she screamed again. Not at him. Because of him. No, Rosaline whispered, her voice shaking. Not again. Not like this. Wyatt tried to speak, but his mouth wouldn't work. His body was shutting down. He could see her standing there, frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. He saw the way she looked at him, not with pity, but with something worse. Recognition. Like she'd been waiting for this moment, like she'd known it would come. Rosaline's mind raced. The last time a bleeding man showed up at her door, it was her husband, Samuel. That was the night everything ended. That was the night the fire came. The night the men in dark coats laughed and rode away. The night she lost her voice and found only screams. She could leave this stranger to die. She should. Letting him in meant letting the past back in, and the past had teeth. But then Wyatt's eyes met hers, desperate, but not cruel. Pleading, but not demanding. And Rosaline saw something she hadn't seen in years, someone who needed her to be strong. Damn you, she muttered, more to herself than to him. She stepped off the porch, grabbed Wyatt under the arms, and dragged him inside. He was heavier than she expected, but Rosaline Mason had been lifting weight her whole life, physical and otherwise. She hauled him across the threshold, kicked the door shut, and let him drop onto the floor near the stove. Wyatt groaned. Blood pooled beneath his leg. Rosaline knelt beside him, her hands moving with precision born from necessity. She'd stitched wounds before. She'd cleaned blood before. She'd buried hope before. You picked the wrong place to die, she said quietly, cutting away his pant leg with a kitchen knife. Wyatt's eyes fluttered. Didn't mean to. Nobody ever does. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound, stitching it closed with thread meant for quilts. Her hands didn't shake, her face didn't flinch, but inside, Rosaline felt the walls she'd built around herself beginning to crack. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and stared at this stranger now bleeding on her floor. You got a name? She asked. Wyatt, he rasped. Wyatt Jeff. Well, Wyatt Jeff, you're going to live. Whether you'll thank me for that is another question entirely. She stood, wiped her hands on a rag, and walked to the window. Outside, the night stretched wide and empty. But somewhere out there, she knew, the men who'd shot him were still coming. And maybe, they were the same men who'd come for her all those years ago. Rosaline's chest tightened. Her breath hitched. And before she could stop it, another scream built in her throat, but this time she swallowed it down. "I cannot survive another night like this," she whispered to the darkness, her forehead pressed against the cold glass. "I cannot bury another body. I cannot scream into the void and pretend it answers back." Behind her, Wyatt stirred, half-conscious, mumbling something she couldn't make out. Rosaline closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would learn why this man had come. Tomorrow she would discover that fate had not dragged him here by accident. Tomorrow the past would stop being a memory and become a reckoning. But tonight she had done the one thing she swore she'd never do again. She had let someone in. By morning, Rosaline would remember why she'd stopped trusting strangers. By morning, the town would whisper that the screaming woman had finally taken in a devil. By morning, everything would change. But first she needed to understand who this man was, and why. When she looked at him, she saw ghosts she thought she'd buried years ago. To understand that, you need to know what they call her in Redemption Flats. You need to know why she screams. And you need to know what happened the night her world burned down and left her standing in the ashes, alone. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Dawn broke cold and clean across the ridge. Wyatt woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood, sharp, rhythmic cracks that cut through the morning silence. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his leg like fire, and he collapsed back onto the floor with a groan. Through the cabin's single window, he could see her. Rosaline Mason stood in the yard, axe raised high, her white hair tied back with a strip of leather. She brought the blade down with precision, splitting a log clean in two. Then another, and another. Her movements were efficient, powerful, nothing wasted. For a woman who had to be past 60, she moved like someone half her age. Wyatt watched, cautious and curious in equal measure. This was the woman they called Mad, the screaming widow of Redemption Flats. He'd heard the stories in passing, back when he still rode with the syndicate. Men would talk around campfires, swapping rumors like currency. "Don't go near the ridge after dark. That old woman up there, she screams like the devil's got hold of her. Cursed land, they say. Her husband died in a fire, and she ain't been right since. Some folks claim she killed him herself." Wyatt had dismissed it as frontier nonsense. Now, lying on her floor with stitches holding his leg together, he wasn't so sure what to believe. The door opened, and Rosaline stepped inside, carrying an armload of firewood. She didn't look at him, just moved to the stove and began rebuilding the fire. "You're awake," she said flatly. "Seems that way. Coffee's almost ready. Don't expect breakfast." Wyatt shifted, testing his weight. Wasn't expecting anything. Rosaline finally glanced at him. Her eyes were steel gray, sharp enough to cut. "Good. The sooner you heal, the sooner you leave." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed him one without ceremony. Wyatt took it, studying her face. There were lines there, deep ones, carved by years of something heavier than age. But beneath the hardness, he saw precision, competence. This woman wasn't broken. She was fortified. They call you the Screaming Widow, Wyatt said carefully. Rosalind's jaw tightened. They call me a lot of things. Are they true? Depends on who's asking. She sat at the small table, her back to the window, and for a moment the silence between them felt like a living thing. The fire came at midnight, Rosalind thought, staring into her coffee. Samuel was in the barn when they set it. I heard him shouting my name. I ran. God! I ran. But the flames were already too high. The men on horseback just watched. One of them tipped his hat at me like it was a social call, and I stood there. I opened my mouth to scream, to curse them, to call for help. But nothing came out. Fear locked my throat shut, and I stayed silent while my husband burned. Rosaline, she blinked. Wyatt was watching her. You drifted, he said quietly. I do that. She set her cup down, her hands steady despite the memory clawing at her insides. Listen carefully, Wyatt Jeff. When night comes, don't listen. To what? To me. Her voice was flat, final. When the sun goes down, I scream. It's not madness. It's not a curse. It just is. So when it happens, you ignore it. You stay inside. You don't ask questions. Understood? Wyatt held her gaze. And if I don't? Rosalind stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Then you'll learn why they call this cursed land. She walked out, leaving him alone with his questions and the cold morning light streaming through the window. 3 days passed before Wyatt could stand without his vision blurring. The leg wasn't healing right, he knew that, but staying still felt worse than the pain. So he started helping. Small things at first, feeding the 2 chickens Rosaline kept, hauling water from the well, splitting kindling when she wasn't looking. Rosaline watched him with narrow eyes but said nothing. On the 4th morning, she found him mending a section of fence near the property line, sweat beading on his forehead, his jaw clenched against the pain. You're going to tear those stitches, she said. Probably. Then you're a fool. Been called worse. Rosaline crossed her arms. Why are you really here, Wyatt Jeff? He hammered another nail, not looking at her. Told you. Wrong place, wrong time. You're a terrible liar. Wyatt finally stopped. He leaned against the fence post, his weight shifted to his good leg, and for a long moment he just stared out at the plains. I worked for the Keller syndicate, he said quietly. 3 years, rode with them, enforced their claims, cleared land for expansion, did things I'm not proud of. He paused. They had a system. Find a family on good land, make them an offer. When they refused, make them disappear. Rosaline felt ice crawl up her spine. 6 weeks ago, they sent me to a homestead near the Colorado line, widow and her 2 boys. The orders were clear. Push them off or push them under. Wyatt's voice went flat. I couldn't do it. Told Keller I was done. He said nobody walks away. So they tried to kill you. They succeeded in making me wish they had. Rosaline studied him, really looked at him this time, the way he carried himself. The quiet violence barely held in check, the guilt carved into every line of his face. The men who burned my husband alive, she said slowly. They wore syndicate brands on their saddles. Wyatt's eyes snapped to hers. Not Keller, Rosaline continued. Different name back then, but the same type of men. The kind who take what they want and bury the witnesses. Understanding passed between them like lightning. How long ago? Wyatt asked. 5 years. And they never came back? Not yet. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truth. Wyatt wasn't here by accident. He was here because men like him, men who worked for syndicates, who knew how they operated, always ended up where the blood had already been spilled. "I'm sorry," Wyatt said. Rosaline shook her head. "Sorry doesn't rebuild what burned." That night, Wyatt heard the scream. He'd been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, when it came, raw and piercing, cutting through the darkness like a knife. Every instinct told him to run, to cover his ears, to hide. But this time, he listened, and in that scream he heard everything Rosaline couldn't say. The rage, the grief, the years of silence breaking apart. When morning came, neither of them spoke about it. But something had shifted. They were no longer strangers sharing a cabin. They were two people who understood what it meant to survive the men who built empires on stolen land. Wyatt found the first stake 2 days later. He'd been walking the property line, checking for weak spots in the fence, when he saw it. A wooden post driven deep into the ground, marked with fresh red paint. Railroad survey marker. He knew them well. The syndicate always followed the rails. He found 3 more before noon. When he returned to the cabin, Rosaline was sitting on the porch, shelling peas into a tin bowl. She looked up, saw his face, and her hands went still. "What did you find?" Wyatt held up one of the stakes. "When were you going to tell me?" Rosaline's jaw tightened. "Tell you what?" "That the railroad's coming through here. That your land is about to be worth something." She set the bowl aside and stood slowly. "It's always been worth something. That's why they wanted it." "Who?" "The men who killed Samuel." Her voice was ice. "They came with papers 5 years ago. Fake deeds, forged signatures. Said we were squatting on land that belonged to the Colorado and Southern expansion. Samuel told them to go to hell." She looked past Wyatt toward the horizon. "They burned the barn that night. Made sure he was inside first." Wyatt felt his blood turn cold. "And they never came back for the land? I think they thought I'd die or leave." Rosaline's smile was bitter. "I'm stubborn that way. Rosaline, if the railroad's surveying again, then they're coming back." She turned to face him fully. "That's what you're saying, isn't it? That men like the ones you worked for are on their way here right now?" Wyatt didn't answer. He didn't need to. Rosaline walked to the edge of the porch and gripped the railing. Her knuckles went white. "I won't leave. I won't sign. I won't let them take what Samuel died protecting." "I know." "Then what do we do?" Before Wyatt could answer, movement caught his eye. A rider on the far ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun, too far to see clearly, but close enough to be watching. "Rosaline," Wyatt said quietly, "we're not alone." She followed his gaze. The rider sat motionless for a long moment, then turned and disappeared over the ridge. Rosaline's breathing changed. Shallow, rapid. Wyatt recognized the signs. He'd seen them in men before battle. "How many do you think?" she whispered. "Enough." The sun dropped lower, shadows stretching across the land like fingers reaching for the cabin. Rosaline's hands began to shake, not from fear, from something deeper, something primal. "They're back," she said, her voice breaking. "After all these years, they're finally back." And then she screamed. Not the nightly scream Wyatt had grown used to. This was different, sharper, more urgent. This wasn't memory clawing its way out. This was warning. This was intuition made sound. When the scream faded, Rosaline turned to Wyatt, tears streaming down her face. "They're going to try again," she said. "And this time, They'll make sure I don't survive to tell the story. Wyatt stepped closer. Then we make sure they don't get the chance. That night, Rosaline didn't scream. She broke. Wyatt found her sitting on the floor near the stove, knees pulled to her chest, rocking slowly. Her eyes were open but unseeing. He'd watched strong men crack like this after battle, the moment when survival stopped being enough. Rosaline. He knelt beside her carefully. It's going to be all right. Her head snapped toward him. Don't. Don't what? Don't lie to me with soft words. Her voice was raw, stripped bare. Don't tell me it'll be all right when we both know what's coming. Don't treat me like I'm fragile. Wyatt reached out to touch her shoulder, but she jerked away. I don't need your kindness, Wyatt Jeff. Rosaline stood, her legs shaking, but her spine straightening. I don't need comfort. I don't need someone to hold my hand and tell me I'm safe. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I need more. Wyatt rose slowly. More what? More truth. Her voice grew stronger with each word. More courage. More than the silence I gave them 5 years ago when I watched my husband burn and said nothing. More than the fear that's kept me screaming into the dark instead of screaming where people can hear me. She turned to face him fully, and Wyatt saw something shift in her eyes, something fierce and unbroken, finally clawing its way to the surface. I need justice acknowledged, Rosaline continued. Not revenge, not violence. I need someone to finally say out loud what they did. I need witnesses. I need the truth spoken in daylight, not buried in the dark with Samuel's bones. Wyatt stared at her, and slowly, so slowly, a smile crossed his face. Not amusement, not pity, something harder, something that looked like respect mixed with resolve. What? Rosaline demanded. You're not asking for comfort, Wyatt said quietly. You're asking for war. I'm asking for what's right. Same thing sometimes. He crossed his arms, studying her. You want them exposed. You want the whole town to know what they did. You want to make enough noise that they can't bury you without everyone watching. Yes. Wyatt's smile widened slightly. Then I'll do more. Rosaline blinked. What? You said you need more. Truth, courage, justice. He moved to the table and sat down, his mind already working. Then I'll do more. I'll help you get it. Not with bullets, with witnesses, with evidence. With every piece of information I know about how these men operate. Why would you risk that? Because I spent 3 years helping men like them destroy people like you. Wyatt's voice went hard. And I'm done being quiet about it. Rosaline sat down across from him, her hands finally steady. They're coming, she said. Let them. Wyatt leaned forward. But this time, when they arrive, the whole damn territory is going to know their names, their crimes, and their faces. We're not fighting in the dark, Rosaline. We're dragging everything into the light. For the first time in 5 years, Rosaline felt something other than fear. She felt ready. They came 3 days later in broad daylight. 4 riders. Clean suits. Leather satchels. The kind of men who didn't look like killers until it was too late. Rosaline was hanging laundry when she saw them coming up the ridge. Her hands froze on the clothesline. Wyatt stepped out of the barn, his hand resting casually near his hip. The lead rider was older, grey-bearded, with eyes like dead fish. He dismounted slowly, pulling papers from his satchel with practiced ease. "Mrs. Mason," he said, his voice oil-smooth. "My name is Harrison Caldwell, representing the Colorado and Southern Railroad Company. I believe you've been expecting us." Rosaline said nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Caldwell smiled. "We've come to settle the matter of your land claim. We have documented proof that this property falls within the railroad's legal right-of-way." He held up the papers. "We're prepared to offer fair compensation for your immediate relocation." "No," Rosaline said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "I'm sorry." Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I said no," louder this time. "Mrs. Mason, I don't think you understand the legal position you're in." Caldwell stepped closer. "These documents have been verified by territorial authorities. You can accept our generous offer, or you can face eviction. Those are your only options." Rosaline felt her knees weaken. The papers looked official. The men looked legitimate. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe. "That's interesting," Wyatt said, walking forward. "Because those documents have the signature of Judge Harlan Moss. Problem is, Moss died 8 months ago. I was at his funeral." Caldwell's smile froze. "And that seal," Wyatt continued, pointing, "belongs to the Denver Land Office. But the railroad expansion falls under Santa Fe jurisdiction. Wrong territory, wrong authority." He tilted his head. "You want to try again? Or should I keep going?" The other 3 men shifted in their saddles. Hands moved toward gun belts. "Who the hell are you?" Caldwell demanded. "Someone who knows how you operate, Mr. Caldwell. Or should I call you by the name you used in Colorado, when you burned out the Hendricks family?" Caldwell's face went white. Movement caught Rosaline's eye. Down the ridge, riders were stopping. Ranchers, travelers, even a few townspeople from Redemption Flats. Word had spread about strangers on the Mason property. Folks were curious. "You're gathering an audience," Wyatt said quietly. "That what you wanted?" Caldwell looked around, seeing witnesses. His jaw tightened. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Rosaline said, her voice steady now. "It's not. But this time, people are watching." Caldwell mounted his horse, yanking the reins hard. "You're making a mistake, old woman." "I made my mistake 5 years ago when I stayed silent." Rosaline stepped forward. "I won't make it again." The 4 men rode off, dust rising behind them. The witnesses lingered, whispering among themselves before slowly dispersing. When they were alone, Rosaline's legs finally gave out. Wyatt caught her before she hit the ground. "We won," she whispered. "No." Wyatt helped her to the porch. "We survived the first round. They'll be back." "I know." Rosaline looked at him. "But next time, I'll be ready to scream where everyone can hear me." They returned at midnight, believing darkness would protect them. Rosaline heard the horses before she saw them. 6 riders this time. No papers. No pretense. Wyatt moved to the window, his hand on his rifle. "They're not here to talk." "I know." Rosaline stood, smoothing her dress with steady hands. "Light every lamp in the house." "Rosaline." "Do it." Wyatt stared at her, then moved quickly, lighting lanterns until the cabin glowed like a beacon against the night. Rosaline walked to the door and opened it wide. Outside, Caldwell sat on his horse, flanked by armed men. Their faces were hard, determined. This was the moment they'd come to finish what they started 5 years ago. "Mrs. Mason," Caldwell said, "last chance. Sign the papers, or we take the land anyway. Your choice." Rosaline stepped onto the porch. She lifted a lantern high, its light cutting through the darkness, and then she screamed. Not the scream of memory, not the scream of pain. This scream was declaration. "My name is Rosaline Mason." Her voice tore through the night like thunder. "5 years ago, these men murdered my husband." Caldwell's horse reared. "Shut her up!" But Rosaline didn't stop. She screamed louder. "They burned him alive in our barn. Samuel Mason, a good man who only wanted to protect his land. They set the fire and watched him die." Lights appeared in the distance, cabins along the ridge, homesteads on the plains, people opening doors, stepping outside. "They came with false papers. They came with lies. And when my husband refused to surrender what was rightfully ours, they killed him." More riders appeared on the ridge. Neighbors, ranchers, townsfolk from Redemption Flats. They stopped, watching, listening. "I stayed silent that night." Rosaline's voice cracked but didn't break. "I let fear steal my voice while my husband burned. But I won't be silent anymore." She pointed at Caldwell. "That man is Harrison Caldwell. He works for the railroad. He's done this before, to the Hendricks family in Colorado, to the Wheelers in New Mexico, to anyone who stands in the way of their expansion." "This is slander," Caldwell shouted, but his voice was drowned out. "The land is mine!" Rosaline screamed. "Bought and paid for with my husband's blood, and I will not let you take it!" The crowd grew larger. 20 people, 30, all watching, all listening. Rosaline's scream became testimony. Her pain became witness. Her silence became voice. Wyatt stepped onto the porch beside her, holding documents high. "I have the ledgers, the real land deeds, the names of every family they've destroyed." Caldwell looked around wildly. Witnesses everywhere. No shadows to hide in, no silence to bury the truth. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "No," Rosaline said, her voice finally steady. "You will." The men turned their horses and rode into the darkness. But the witnesses remained, and for the first time in 5 years, Rosaline's scream didn't echo into emptiness. It echoed into history. The men didn't leave. They circled back an hour later, dismounting at the edge of the property. Caldwell's face was twisted with rage. The witnesses had dispersed, returning to their homes with whispers on their lips. Now it was just the 6 of them against Wyatt and Rosaline. "You made a mistake," Caldwell said, his hand on his gun. "Screaming into the night doesn't change who owns this land." One of his men drew his pistol, then another. Rosaline felt her courage waver. Wyatt had a rifle, but 6 against 1 were impossible odds. Then Wyatt did something unexpected. He stepped off the porch, slowly, deliberately, and he lowered his rifle to the ground. "What are you doing?" Rosaline hissed. Wyatt raised his hands, empty, and walked forward until he stood 10 feet from Caldwell. No weapon, no cover. Just a man standing in the open. "You can shoot me," Wyatt said calmly. "Right here, right now, in front of Mrs. Mason, in front of anyone who might be watching from the ridge." He glanced toward the darkness where lanterns still flickered in distant windows. "But before you do, you should know what I'm carrying." He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. Caldwell's eyes widened. "Keller Syndicate records," Wyatt continued. 3 years of transactions. Every family you've displaced. Every forged deed. Every bribed official. He opened the book, reading by moonlight. "Hendricks family, Colorado, 1876. Deed falsified by Harrison Caldwell. Wheeler family, New Mexico, 1877. Deed falsified by Harrison Caldwell. Mason family, Kansas, 1873. Shut your mouth, Caldwell growled. Martinez family, Patterson family, Chen family." Wyatt's voice never rose, never wavered. 43 families in total, all documented, all witnessed, all signed by you. Those records are supposed to be buried, burned. Wyatt smiled without humor. I made copies, sent them to 3 different territorial judges, one to a newspaper editor in Denver, and one to the federal marshal's office in Santa Fe. Caldwell's gun hand trembled. You can kill me, Wyatt said. You can kill Mrs. Mason. But the evidence is already out there, and every person who heard her testimony tonight will remember your name. He took a step closer. So here's your choice. Ride away now, and maybe, you can disappear before the law catches up. Or stay here and guarantee they find you standing over our bodies. Silence stretched across the ridge. One of Caldwell's men holstered his gun. Then another. This isn't over, Caldwell said, his voice hollow. Yes, Wyatt replied. It is. Caldwell stared at him for a long moment, then spat in the dirt. He mounted his horse, and his men followed. They rode south, toward the border, toward anywhere that wasn't here. Wyatt stood perfectly still until they disappeared. When he finally turned back to the cabin, Rosaline was crying. You didn't fight them, she said. No. Wyatt picked up his rifle. I just refused to let them pass. The law, will it really come? Eventually. He climbed the porch steps. But the truth came first. That's what matters. Rosaline nodded slowly. For the first time, she believed him. Dawn came quiet and clean. Rosaline sat on the porch steps, a cup of coffee warming her hands, watching the sun climb over the plains. The land stretched before her, unchanged, yet entirely different. Hers. Finally, truly hers. She'd slept through the night without screaming. Not because the pain had vanished, not because the memories had faded, but because the silence that had choked her for 5 years was finally broken. The truth had been spoken. Witnesses had heard. The past was no longer a secret buried in darkness. It was history, acknowledged and known. Down the ridge, a wagon approached. Rosaline recognized the driver, Martha Henley from Redemption Flats, the woman who'd crossed the street to avoid her for years. The wagon stopped at the property line. Martha climbed down, carrying a covered basket. She walked up slowly, her face uncertain. Mrs. Mason, she said quietly, I brought bread, and I wanted to say I'm sorry for not listening sooner, for believing the rumors instead of... Her voice broke. I'm sorry. Rosaline stood, taking the basket. Thank you, Martha. Other visitors came throughout the morning, ranchers tipping their hats, families offering help with repairs, even the sheriff from town promising to send word to the territorial marshal about Caldwell's crimes. The woman they'd called mad was being seen for the first time. By noon, Wyatt had his saddlebags packed. Rosaline found him in the barn, checking his horse's shoes. His leg had healed enough to ride. They both knew he'd been staying longer than necessary. You're leaving, she said, not a question. Yeah. Wyatt didn't look at her. Land's safe now. You don't need me anymore. That's not why I came out here. He turned. Rosaline stepped closer, her spine straight, her eyes clear. I came to thank you, not for fighting, not for protecting me. She paused. For standing beside me when I finally stood for myself. Wyatt's throat tightened. You didn't need me for that. Maybe not, but you were there anyway. She held out her hand. Thank you, Wyatt Jeff, for doing more. He shook her hand, her grip firm and steady. Where will you go? Rosaline asked. Don't know yet. Wyatt smiled slightly. Somewhere I can start over. Maybe find another widow who needs help fixing her fence. Maybe find yourself a life worth living. Yeah, maybe that too. He mounted his horse, settling into the saddle. Rosaline walked him to the property line, the same place he'd collapsed weeks ago. Bleeding and desperate. "Rosaline," Wyatt said, looking back at the cabin. "That scream of yours, it didn't disappear." "I know," she said softly. "It was answered." Wyatt nodded, tipped his hat, and rode down the ridge. Rosaline stood there until he was just a speck on the horizon. Then she turned back to her land, her home, her life. That night, when darkness fell, she sat by the window and waited. No scream came, just peace, just silence, chosen instead of forced. And in that quiet, Rosaline Mason finally found what she'd been searching for all along, not the absence of pain, but the presence of truth. If this story stayed with you, please hit the like button. It truly helps share these tales with a wider audience. And to join our community of listeners, be sure to subscribe. Now, I want to know, what part of the story resonated with you the most, or what twist caught you completely by surprise? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're ready for another inspiring tale, click on this video right here for our latest installment. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.